There's an aspect of R2-D2 that I found consistently funny when preparing my notes for this video, but it was so interesting I figured it deserved a dedicated chapter. And that is his ability to get around with such a limited leg design. If there's one thing R2 isn't designed for, it's physical maneuverability. He can't even take proper footsteps. The closest he can do is shuffle awkwardly at maybe 1 mile an hour. With those flat feet and their tiny wheels, there's no way R2 would be able to make his way across the desert dunes of Tatooine. Have you ever tried walking up and down sand dunes? It's hard work, even with human legs. Undoubtedly R2 would end up toppling over and being stuck there until someone found him or the sand covered him up. And how about trying to get across jagged rock structures? Then there's the swamp planet, Dagobah. Slimy mud, pools of water and big tree roots sticking out the ground everywhere. R2 wouldn't be able to move more than a few feet without ending up like this. There's also Endor, the forest moon, probably not as physically awkward as Dagobah, but R2 still wouldn't be able to get more than a few meters before toppling over little dirt mounds or getting fenced in by path-blocking roots and branches. He doesn't even have any arms to clear such obstacles out of his path. And then there's the old nemesis of the disabled, stairs. You can't wheel up or down them, not even with a standard wheelchair which has wheels far larger than the little rollers that are attached to R2's feet. Despite all this, there are hardly any moments at all in the trilogy where the more agile human characters take a moment to physically assist the disabled R2-D2 to get around. Instead, the film gets around R2's severe restrictions of maneuverability with a variety of perceptual tricks. They're so frequent and yet so varied that the deception works very effectively. And this is worth studying both thematically, which we'll come to after I've shown the examples, and technically. They're a great example of how to trick the audience with cost-effective camera work and editing. In our introduction to R2, he's seen comfortably making his way around on solid hard floors, giving a general impression of basic maneuverability. We're also shown that he has a detractable third leg for extra movement speed. His general lack of speed is also offset by C-3PO having stiff, rigid limbs that make him move at roughly the same speed. And as they escape the ship, R2 is seen shuffling his feet and getting into an apparently round door to escape the pod, but we can't actually see whatever obstacle his feet are overcoming there. The escape pod itself is funny. It just looks like a garbage can in space. Somehow it lands without a droid demolishing impact. Now that looks like it might be a parachute of some kind next to the ship there, but in the next shot it's just the door. And there's a small impact crater, so they must have come down like a meteor. And look how high off the sand the hole is. How did R2 get out? 3PO was too frail to lift him, so R2 must have just used the old technique. Also in this first shot we can see R2 somehow wheeling his way across the sand. I'll bet they put a big flat board under the sand for him to wheel a couple of meters without a camera cut. In all the shots after that, R2's feet are either off screen or the camera is low enough to disguise whatever walkway has been added by the film crew. In his next scene, R2 makes his way through an incredibly rocky landscape via some very convenient bits of flat ground. Here we can see that that flat ground is about to come to an end and will turn to awkward gravel and pebbles. But follow the shots and the ground keeps magically smoothing itself in advance of R2. Then a convenient wheelchair access ramp appears beneath him before the Jawa surprise attack. And at this point I think R2 slamming face first into the ground is a clever little joke, a nudge to the audience about the unrealism of R2 wheeling about in these landscapes. Now, I'm not going to run through every R2 movement scene because that would take quite a while, so I'll stick to the ones that are funniest and the ones that use the most unusual perceptual trickery. So, when the droids are sold to Luke's uncle, we see an initial ramp, but it's so steep most of the droids, including R2 and 3PO, would topple their way down. The sand is all conveniently flat here as well for the droids, but the filmmakers have took the time to create fake tracks behind the Jawa truck as well. We get a quick shot of R2 riding on clearly quite solid ground, not sand, but his leg design is even worse than we thought. Is that a single tiny wheel under each leg? I think it's 2 wheels on each, one hidden behind the other, but still very poor manoeuvrability. Finishing the scene, Luke walks down some steps and R2 encounters his first stairway obstacle. But instead of showing him topple down there, or Luke having to come back out and help him, the scene sneakily fades to black, leaving us to assume that R2 was able to get down those stairs. Let's not forget as well that when R2 sneaks out of the underground lair at night, he would have had to make it up various flights of steps just to get out the place. And by the way, the place isn't very secure, even the lamps keep escaping. Definitely not secure considering the sand people who occupy this landscape too. During the attack by the sand people, R2 is able to hide in a not very concealing cave, which has a convenient flat entrance for him. R2 reminds Luke to go and find 3PO who fell and broke his arm off, but it was way up on a high rock face. Somehow R2 climbs up there to help find 3PO. In fact, let's just call it for what it is. R2 teleported up there between scenes, didn't he? Either that or the broken 3PO teleported his way down to them. It's amazing what filmmakers can get away with in terms of physical space logic between shots. And R2 will do a lot more teleporting. Onto Ben's place, another step obstacle that R2 overcomes before and after the scene when we can't see him. And then getting to Mos Eisley, various droids are seen moving across the sand, a couple of them up close with their legs off screen. R2 is amusingly balanced on the back of the land speeder. With the speeds that this thing goes, surely at some point he would have fell off and rolled so hard his legs would have broken. Ah, but he's tied down, I hear you say. No, he's not. As soon as they stop, not only is R2 totally unstrapped, but he somehow starts shuffling his way off as if he had shoulders or hips. As he slides off, 3PO reaches out with his useless hands to help him, but we cut away. R2 is then seen shuffling awkwardly across the sand with an impatient comment from 3PO.
How long, R2?
But we just saw other droids riding on this same sand, so this is one of the things that makes me think the filmmakers were not only aware of the unrealism of R2's movement, but were also using it to inject a bit of visual humour into the film. Inside, R2 shuffles a bit near the stairs, very awkward stairs, but the barman saves the day by telling him and 3PO to get out. Imagine if R2 had struggled down the steps and then been told to get out, shuffling back up the stairs while the various monsters threw food at him. One last important R2 teleportation moment before they leave Tatooine. At last we see R2 climbing downstairs and he's completely unaided apparently. Looks like he's being held by strings, or maybe little Kenny Baker, the actor, is holding a lightweight model and moving it. Camera moves away and after a few seconds R2 shuffles into the shot as if he thought fuck it and just threw himself down the steps to save time. To my knowledge, this is the only moment in the trilogy where we actually see R2 using stairs, but it's done as a background detail instead of close up. The good thing about that is it slips the idea in unconsciously for us viewers. To show it too obviously, it would defy our belief. So we assume from here on that R2 is able to get up and down stairs even though it's never shown again. Once the story moves on to the Death Star, R2 literally has an easy ride for most of the remaining story. In fact, if he had given himself over to the dark side to begin with, he could have been blessed with flat, wheel-friendly surfaces for the rest of his existence. He must really hate the Empire to turn that opportunity down. Let's move on to The Empire Strikes Back. R2 wouldn't be able to move in snow, but thankfully the story doesn't take him out there very much. Instead, it takes him to Dagobah, where the occasional bit of flat solid ground manifests itself for his convenience. R2 can also move underwater and doesn't get his circuits fried. He must have some pretty advanced waterproofing under that hull considering all the mud he spits out. And after the swamp creature spits him out, for once we see him having to be helped onto his feet. But when Luke uses the Force to lift him and then loses concentration and drops him, R2 is seen getting back on his feet of his own accord, somehow. Once he's at Cloud City, he's back to solid flooring though. In Return of the Jedi, R2 is back on Tatooine, and again his travelling is aided by ground that has auto-smooth. Entering Jabba's presence, we have another great example of R2-D2's teleportation technique. The two droids approach these stairs, 3PO is seen walking down them, but R2 seems to just sneakily wander off to the right. Camera pans to the left and R2 magically pops out alongside 3PO again. So, like with the previous shot that I mentioned from the first film, I think what's happened here is there are two R2-D2's, one that is by the stairs or on the stairs in the first instance, and then the camera moves and then a second R2-D2 wheels into shot, so that it gives the impression of continuity of movement. It's impressive that these kinds of visual cheats were used, but no one ever seems to pick up on it and complain. After that, there's R2's ability to somehow get around in the forest setting of the Ewoks, but I've already mentioned that, so I won't go into it in detail. Now, aside from amusement and the technicality of fooling the audience perception, you might think, well, what's the point of studying R2's unrealistic movement? Well, the point is that R2 is generally a very underestimated character in this trilogy, probably the most underestimated, and his ability to get around physically in a manner that defies his physical appearance, that furthers the point. It fits very nicely with that particular theme. So it's like if Superman only did his flying off screen, leaving us to wonder how he gets from place to place. Of course, special effects limitations were probably the key conscious factor in R2's stale-paced movement, but there do seem to be moments where his slow movement and physical inability are made fun of by the films. R2's hidden teleportation ability, for lack of a better term, also fits nicely with a major theme that we will explore in the final chapter of this analysis. But first we have one more example to explore of R2's seemingly magical physical skills.